We switch contexts 1,200 times in an average workday.
Yeah, that sounds right.
1,200 times. That's crazy.
This is Unsupervised Learning, Redpoint's AI podcast. And today we have on Rahul Roy-Chowdhury, the CEO of Grammarly. If you don't know Grammarly, it's a personalized AI assistant app for writing that has over 30 million daily active users. They've raised over $400 million, the most recent valuation of $13 billion, and are one of the most established players in the space. Rahul was the perfect guest to have on, and that Grammarly has been building AI productivity tooling long before the most recent GenAI wave. Given the high-stakes nature of handling communication and wide variety of companies that Grammarly serves, Rahul had some super interesting insights, including how to think about evals. It was also interesting to hear Rahul talk about how he thinks about competition in the space long term, and his perspective on how AI will be adopted by enterprises and educational institutions. Overall, this was a really fun episode with a CEO I have a ton of respect for. Now here's Rahul. Well, Rahul, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jacob. Appreciate it.
This is one I've been looking forward to. As a Grammarly user for a while, it's always nice to get to meet your the people that have made your life easier in person. So,
well, thank you for being a Grammarly user. Send product feedback my way.
Definitely will do, and I'm sure I'm not the only one of our listeners who's used it for a while. I thought I'd start in like the most zoomed out way possible, which is that we're obviously seeing this trend of AI writing more and more human communications. And you can imagine these models are only going to get better.
Yep.
I'm sure, in the future, we'll have plenty of emails, text, all sorts of things written by AI.
Yep.
What do you think that means for like human-to-human communication in 10 years? Or are our AIs just going to be having long conversations that we occasionally, come in on? Or what actually happens as the way we communicate with these models gets better and better?
So imagine 10 years from now, we are communicating with each other in ways that are more meaningful, forming deeper connections, because a lot of the drudgery of our day-to-day work has been taken away because of AI. And so we can focus on the things that we do best, being creative, synthesizing ideas, connecting with other human beings. And that's the future we want to bring about. Hopefully we're sending less email and reading and writing fewer documents. I hope to God that's true, because I'm already at the limit of what I think I can do today. And so, so I think it's not about creating more content. It's not about creating more volume. It's about just making things better, more memorable, more evocative, more on point, more kind of just precise. And that's a future I'd love to bring about. Today, for example, the average person, and this rings true for me and maybe for you, we switch contexts 1,200 times in an average workday.
Yeah, that sounds right.
1,200 times. That's crazy. So I'd love a future in which AI enables us to just be in flow state and focus on what we do best. That's a promise of AI. And hopefully we're doing less of it because each conversation we have becomes measurably more valuable. That's, I think, the promise of AI. That's what we're working on at Grammarly.
So do you think there's like less emails overall and less text, but the ones that you do get are the ones that actually matter and the ones that either facilitate connection or really lead to some kind of important or creative decision?
I don't think it necessarily has to turn out that way, but I think we should push towards that outcome because that's a better outcome for us. And I'm a big believer that we as humans, as users and purveyors of AI, we have agency. We should bring about the world that we want to see. So there's an alternative world in which we are kind of like now cost of content is zero. And so there's a lot more content. And I'm already today drowning in the amount of content I got to consume. So now there's 10x more. How do I do it? Well, I can turn to AI. So now you have AI generating content, AI consuming the content. That's not a world that I want to live in. That seems quite dystopian. For me, writing, communicating, it's part of what it means to be human. It's how I think. And we shouldn't outsource that to AI. That's something that is uniquely ours. Totally. And so let's bring about that world.
Well, I'm sure we'll get into how exactly you kind of think about bringing about that world. But maybe to start would just be helpful to maybe contextualize for our listeners. I'm sure most folks have used Grammarly, they've been exposed to it in some way. But for the few of our listeners who haven't, maybe just talk a little bit about the Grammarly product today and kind of what you can and can't do and where you kind of hope things go.
Yeah, we've been around for 15 years. So we launched in 2009. And so hopefully many of our users have been using our product for a while. And we've actually ridden many technology waves. We started out as being mostly rules-based, using natural language processing, moved to a lot of deep learning models, and now we're using LLMs and GenAI. So we kind of figure out what use cases we need to solve for our users, and then we figure out what technology we can bring to bear to solve those use cases in the best way. So that's our track record for 15 years. So to talk about the product and where we're going, maybe a very simple conceptual framework is think about a life cycle of communication as having 4 stages. Just a simplified view of the world, but like it's helpful. Stage 1 is I'm ideating and conceptualizing what I want to say. Stage 2 is I compose. I write down what it is I'm actually trying to get across. Stage 3 is I revise it and polish it and make it better. And then stage 4, because communication is a multiplayer game, is someone at the other end is receiving what I've just written down and is comprehending it. So there's ideation, there's composition, there's revision, and then comprehension at the other end. So if you think about that life cycle, Grammarly, for most of its history, has been primarily focused in the revision phase of that communication life cycle. So you've written a piece of text, you're writing an email or writing a doc, and Grammarly comes and helps you get the words correct, but not just getting it correct, making sure that you're on point, you're following your organizational style guides, you are striking the right tone, maybe if you're too verbose, helping you with brevity, one of the problems I have. And so we help you with all these things. And then going forward, I think what LLMs enable us to do is really turbocharge the value we can provide to our users. And you can think of this as two ways. One is we can actually tie communication to business outcomes. So increasingly what you're going to see from Grammarly is our suggestions are going to be much more strategically aligned to the outcomes you want to achieve. So Grammarly will increasingly become a lot of the correctness and a lot of the polish, we can just auto-apply for you. So we can focus our attention on helping you achieve your outcomes. So imagine you're writing an email and you're trying to drum up enthusiasm for some event you're hosting in the office. And hey, folks. Been there. So people like, so hey, this is going to be awesome. Everyone, please show up. And then Grammarly looks at it and says, it looks like you're trying to drum up enthusiasm for this event, but maybe you should say why people should go. Is there free food? Great. Please add that in the email and kind of demonstrate the value. Or maybe you're writing an email to your board and you're asking for something, but the call to action isn't very clear. So Grammarly may suggest, it looks like you're trying to achieve this outcome. Add a call to action that is very clear, that people understand what they need to do to respond to your email. So we're going to move towards more strategic suggestions, and a lot of the mechanics of correctness and tone will sort of fade into, we'll just auto-apply that for you. It's kind of the table stakes. So that's one big avenue vector of kind of how the product will evolve. The other one is we're going to move from focusing on the revision phase to really being with you through the entire life cycle of communication. So you can use Grammarly. It's always available. You can call it up. You can conceptualize and ideate with Grammarly. You can compose with Grammarly. You can revise and polish like you always do. And then you can use Grammarly to comprehend. So if you look at a long email thread, you can say, hey, Grammarly, please summarize what this says and give me the main points. And by the way, is there an action item for me? I'd like to know that, so I can take action on this.
Totally.
So that's how the product is going to evolve.
I love that vision. And maybe, to take, I think, three of the things I heard there, one of them is kind of, getting involved in the brainstorm phase. Yeah. The other is kind of more strategic edits at a higher level of insert the free food or the call to action. And then the third being comprehension. I'm sure you're playing around with a lot of this stuff internally.
Yeah.
To what extent, across those three, on a scale of you throw an LLM at it and it kind of just works, to like, oh my God, you should see the raw results when you try and do some of this with an LLM today. Like across those three, like, what have you kind of observed of where we are from capabilities today?
LLMs are very powerful technologies, but it's early. And I think you cannot take the output of an LLM and just throw it over the wall. We're operating at scale. We have a lot of users, and communication, the use cases we support for our users are pretty important use cases. You're writing an email, it's an important email. So false positives or sensitive text or some other safety issue actually has real consequences. So we have a responsibility to our users to make sure that we're not just throwing a model over the wall, but we do a lot of work to fine-tune the model for our use cases. We do a lot of work on quality evals, on safety evals. So there's actually quite a bit of work that goes into a new model is released, to how do we shape it and fine-tune and customize it in a way that we feel good, that we can kind of be consistent with our promise to our users before we ship it out to them.
I feel like there's always this question of what accuracy level you need to get to. And I feel like in the early days of using these LLMs, the use cases that really took off were the ones that could be, 60% or 80% accurate, like marketing, where it's like hallucinations could be a good thing. Or, a co-pilot type, use case. And obviously these more, deterministic, like I just outsourced the AI and I trust it 100% of the time, has been much more challenging. Yeah. How do you, because a lot of your workflow is kind of co-piloty. Like, how do you think about how accurate these models need to be? So I guess for the editing one, or sorry, the revision one, does it need to be, maybe 90% of the time it's a really good, free food, call to action, whatever it is, and then 10% of the time it says something that's kind of gibberish? Or like what bar do you feel like you need to get to be useful to your user?
I think the users tell us what the bar is, because we can see how users are responding to these features, and we are tracking how users accept or reject suggestions. We're tracking how users are engaged or not engaged with the features. And that's actually a big source of quality input that we keep getting. It's kind of a continuous loop that we keep getting from our users. We use that to fine-tune quality, but also we understand, we run experiments to start with to say, we think it's met our quality bar based on the evals we've done. We do side-by-side evals. So we have human experts rate an LLM output versus kind of a curated output to say which one they prefer. So we have our own sort of objective measures of what is good quality. And then our users tell us if we hit the bar or not. And it's contextually dependent, it's use case dependent, so there isn't a one-size-fits-all. But we look at all those things holistically. So maybe there could be a feature that met all of our kind of evals and passed all of our evals with flying colors, launch an experiment to our users, and users just don't engage with it. The use cases they were using it for were things that we hadn't seen, we didn't perform that well. So we have to go back to the drawing board and do a much better job before we do a broader rollout. So, there's a lot of iteration involved. I think it's not let's throw it over the wall and see what happens.
Totally. Is there an example of that comes to mind, like a feature you thought, worked pretty well internally, and then, one of the benefits you have is you have so many users. So I'm sure the second you launch something, you quickly learn all the kind of edge cases and different ways folks do it.
So one interesting thing, we learned a lot of interesting edge cases and use cases from our users. One that's interesting is we have a tone detector, a feature. So you're writing an email and we can detect what the tone of the email is, and then you can change the tone if you'd like. And so we could say, this sounds a bit grim. Maybe you want to sound a bit more positive or happier. And one of the things we learned was there were some scenarios in which surfacing these suggestions were very inappropriate, because actually it was not a pleasant email, or it wasn't a pleasant document. Actually, the most extreme example of this was a police department in one of our local police precincts somewhere said, hey, we use Grammarly and we actually find Grammarly invaluable in typing up reports of crimes, sometimes serious crimes. But can you stop with the sound more positive? That's not the intention here. So we're like, got it. Not a thing we had actually anticipated.
Right.
So we learn and we iterate and so in that scenario we say, all right, well, there may be some scenarios in which the text is sensitive. And so we need to make sure we know what to suppress and what to show in terms of what suggestions are most helpful in these scenarios.
Yeah.
And so we keep learning and iterating. The kind of the things all the ways in which we communicate with each other is just infinite. So it's just an endlessly varied set of use cases.
One thing, I feel like so many people are trying to figure out how best to use these tools, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's so many people that use Grammarly and are using AI for writing. And I'm wondering if you've seen any emerging, as you think about the best practices or the folks that you're like, God, those people use these tools really well. Like anything that you've noticed in people who seem to be using them effectively?
Yeah, so we're here to help you. We provide communication assistance. We help you communicate better. The people who really, I think, exemplify what we'd love to see in terms of how Grammarly is used is understand that communication is a strategic imperative. It's how you can achieve your goals as an individual, and it's how organizations can actually function and operate better. So connecting communication to organizational goals and personal goals strategically is actually the places where I've seen Grammarly provides the most amount of value. So as an example, one of our customers is a company called ModMed, stands for Modernizing Medicine. And they've deployed Grammarly organization-wide, and they're an e-health company, and they're using Grammarly very strategically to drive better performance as an organization. You can imagine they're writing sensitive documents, they're writing patient reports, and they're using AI enhanced communication to achieve better patient outcomes. And they can track it and measure it. And so I think that's the key importance of what we do. And as AI gets more prevalent across the workplace, we've got to understand, what are we trying to accomplish here? What is the goal we want to achieve? And how does this AI solution, whether it's Grammarly or something else, how is it helping me achieve that goal? So It's not just hey, it sounds like it's a cool thing and we should use it. It's more like, what is the goal and how am I getting better or closer to my goal?
Totally. It's so interesting. I feel like this comes up in so many contexts on this podcast where, everyone wants to put in some Gen AI feature. And it's actually come up in the context of evaluations where I feel like frequently folks are like, the reason evaluations are difficult is a lot of time people are like, oh, we should ship this Gen AI feature. And then it's like, well, what does success actually look like for that feature? Like, what are you actually evaluating whether it can or can't do? And I feel like that's I think being really thoughtful about what you're actually trying to achieve. It's really cool technology, but obviously to have a business impact, you need to know that.
And because it's so hyped up, like most massive hype cycles, I think it's always like it's overhyped in the short term and then actually underhyped in the long term. It is very transformative, but right now this let's just stick AI into everything and like it's going to be great is not actually a way to solve user problems. It's funny, actually, the FTC released a document maybe a couple of months ago, I think I saw it, where they say, hey, we have some rules around the use of the word AI in your product descriptions. Rule number one, it's actually got to have AI. So I'm like, yeah, makes sense. I'm glad you have that rule.
Did a lot of the .ai companies have to go to .com again after that?
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, as you mentioned before, you've kind of ridden a bunch of these technology waves. And obviously, as the models have gotten better and as techniques have changed, you guys have adapted the product. I think it's always interesting to hear, like, one, what were things like at Grammarly when like ChatGPT came out and kind of people realized the power? I mean, you might have already played with GPT-3 before then, but like, and then also, with each subsequent model, like GPT-4, what have kind of been some of the stuff that's been unlocked as these models have gotten better?
Yeah, it's interesting. So GPT, I think we saw ChatGPT as kind of this watershed moment, but I think we were taken aback at the speed and scale and pace of change, as I think many people were. Honestly, it was just the fastest growing consumer product in history. Just the pace at which the quality was improving was pretty incredible. And so we had built this track record of serving users with a different technology stack, using natural language processing, using deep learning. So there's a moment for us to figure out, well, how do we respond to this kind of this new technology stack that can actually help us with the use cases we've always cared about? And ultimately, we see this as just a huge enabler for our mission. What we provide is we understand communication. We're the domain experts in communication. And we've had a long track record of saying, we understand our users. We understand what good communication looks like. That's our bread and butter. And then we will harness technology, whatever the latest tech is at the point, to be able to provide the best possible solution to our users to solve those use cases. NLP was what was the best available tech at the time when Grammarly launched. NLP is rule-based. So we started with grammar because grammar is rule-based. Yeah. So we kind of like, NLP doesn't let you do ideation and co-creation, so we couldn't do it. So we always want to figure out, let's take this technology and then solve the user problems we've always cared about in a better, deeper, more meaningful way. So ultimately, it was a catalyst and enabler for us. And so we kind of just embraced it. We launched our own version of GenAI shortly after, and we're learning and iterating from it.
And is rules-based grammar still like the best way to tackle some of those use cases versus, LLMs, which maybe are right about grammar 80% of the time and 20% say something crazy?
I think when GPT-3 launched, for example, we used to do side-by-sides, and the precision of NLP was far greater. These models were hallucinating a lot. Quality wasn't great. But the improvements in quality I've seen over the last couple of years is just phenomenal. Yeah. Fantastic. So right now, there may be some deltas, edge cases here and there, but I think that's largely disappeared. I think essentially these models are as good as anything that we would have with a rule-based system.
It kind of leads to an interesting question. I feel like the most common question we get from startup founders is this idea of like, how do you think about what to build when there's shortcomings now? There's things that these models can't do.
Yeah.
And then it feels like at the same time, if you went to a beach for 2 years and then came back, maybe you just get for free some of these underlying capabilities in the models. And I'm curious, as you guys think about your product roadmap, I'm sure there's all sorts of things that state-of-the-art models can't do today that you're like, this would be so valuable to our customers.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a subset of that you're like, I wonder if GPT-5, GPT-6 like might actually have this long-term. Like, how does that influence your product roadmap and how do you think about that?
I think it comes down to what is the problem you're solving for our users, and then what is your brand promise to your users. So as an example, if there's safety issues in models, that's not something we can punt to the future. If models are not safe, and we need to do a lot of post-processing on these models to make sure that we are providing a safe environment for our users, we're going to do it, and we're going to make this. In fact, we have done it because safety is not something you can outsource. So we do a lot of work on fine-tuning, on safety evals, that is really custom to our use cases. So we, maybe models will get better in 2 years, and then we can say, what, all of that work is no longer necessary, or we can do it in a much more efficient way. But that's not true today, and we can't punt on that problem. So we got to do it. And so you've got to just make sure your user is not getting stuck in the middle of technology gaps or deficiencies. There are other ways in which I think there's exciting work we want to start prototyping and testing out. So like one of the things that's interesting is models are getting much more efficient. So if you get smaller models that are much more efficient at inference, that implies that you can move a lot of inference to the edge. And so that means a lot more on device. So that's something we're playing around with and testing out and seeing what does it mean if actually a lot of these things could actually happen on device. And so we're testing it out, we're iterating through it, and then I think that's something we can evolve in the future.
Is the appeal of on-device like security or privacy or?
It's a lot of things. I think it's security, privacy. It just should be cost of inference. It could be latency and user experience. So depending on like if you have some compute intensive prompt, let's say with a large context window, having it on device could actually make the difference between this is unacceptably slow to actually this is a joy and a delight to use. So I think it's all of the above. And then, so you've got to just figure out where it fits in your portfolio of investments you want to make.
When GPT-5 comes out, like, are there a set of things that you're like, I really hope the next version of an LLM can do X, Y, or Z that would be kind of really important for our product? Like when it comes out, like what are the first things you're going to mess around with and see if it can do?
I think it's not a GPT-5 specific thing. I think it's just the next gen of models. Yeah. I think a capability that's going to be super exciting for us is communication workflows are pretty complex. They're multi-step. Like think about let's say an email I need to send to my board of directors about some big product launch. There's so many things that go into crafting this email. First of all, what is the product launch? Where are we? What's the marketing team doing? What's the engineering team doing? What's the product team doing? What's the cost structure of this launch? What's our comms and PR plan? It's an email to the board, so that has certain connotations. I got to keep it brief, got to keep it succinct, get the main points across. So there's so many steps in actually that goes into crafting this important piece of communication. And so as these models get more capable of multi-step reasoning, I think you can kind of enable these agentic workflows where increasingly Grammarly can help you orchestrate through a complex and reason through a complex multi-step communication flow. And I think that's just super exciting. Like when I think about the drudgery of work, so much of it is just cutting and pasting context. Maybe not literally, but figuratively, cutting and pasting context from one place to another. Like, okay, I got this detailed email. I got to summarize it for this other person or for this other team. And so much of what we do is just synthesize and summarize and cut and paste context. And so multi-stage reasoning and orchestration, I think, could be a game changer in just making this magical, easy, super smooth, so we can unlock that flow state we talked about.
So in that board email example, you'd be pulling in context from a lot of different places.
That's right.
And even the model might have a hypothesis of like the best set of steps to do to write that update.
That's right.
And you could probably edit it or kind of.
That's right. And there's some domain expertise involved. Like what constitutes a good email to the board? You sound confident. You got to be brief. And so like what are the attributes of that piece of communication? So you got to bring it all together. Domain expertise, multi-step reasoning, contextual awareness, and then put it all together to just get exactly the right words at the right time for that audience.
Are there any weird quirks of like the models today? I mean, I feel like the one that went viral on the internet was like Delve and the fact that it just shows up everywhere. Like, I don't know. Have you seen other things that you've had to correct for?
Yeah, I think models have generally gotten a lot more sophisticated, a lot more capable. But what's surprising to me is to the extent to which these models, I had this maybe misconceived idea of, I thought these models would be basically plug and play. At some point, they would just be, you can swap one out, put another one in, and it would just work fine. But actually, that's not how it pans out. That's not how we experience it as well. These models are all quite idiosyncratic. They operate differently. They respond differently to a common set of prompts. They have different sort of parameters around safety. And so with each new model, there's actually a lot of work that goes into making it fit for purpose. Like what use cases do you want to use it for? How are you going to do the model evals? It's a little bit different for every model. And so each model is still kind of a special snowflake. Yeah. And so I think that was surprising to me. I thought they would be more interchangeable now, but that's the case. That's the reality.
And then I guess, obviously I imagine behind the hood, you guys are orchestrating a bunch of, you use a larger model and most capable model for some things, smaller models that are faster and for less complex tasks. Like, where are you using kind of like, okay, we have to use largest state-of-the-art, models for these things? And where have you been able to be like, actually, we could use a smaller open source model or fine-tune a smaller model?
So we typically, what we do is we have, I would say, maybe a half dozen or so models in production, combination of closed source, open source. And so we use models of different sizes. Most of them are fine-tuned on our user data. and so we can be more precise for the use cases we support. It's less about do we use a large model or small model. What we typically do is we'll figure out the use cases that we want to use this model for, and then we'll distill the model down using fine-tuning to the smallest and most efficient model possible for that use case without decreasing quality. At some point, we're going to see a degradation in quality, and we'll say, okay, let's stop there. Our goal is not to get to the smallest possible model. Our goal is to just get to the most efficient model without any loss in quality and fidelity, because we want to make sure we are providing high-quality assistance for our users.
It's interesting. I feel like so many companies that are in the early days of their AI journey are just in like, hey, let's just discover what's possible with these models, and we'll use the largest models possible that are the best. And then later we'll get to cost. But given just the user base you have, I think you probably have to take cost more into consideration than your average.
It's cost and also latency. Like one of the things that low latency allows you to do, it's not just the cost of inference and serving, but it's also you have a better user experience.
Totally. Well, back to your thing on flow state. Like
exactly.
I feel like it's way easier if this is happening in real time.
Exactly.
And then, one thing I think you guys do so effectively is tailoring the, Grammarly's product to, a company and like, their kind of brand or style and an individual user. You mentioned kind of the idea of a board email being very different than a police report than other things. Like, how does that actually happen behind the scenes? Like, are you like fine tuning models or just providing more context in the context window, or like, how do you guys do that so effectively?
Well, one of the things we have that I think make Grammarly special and unique is that we have a ton of users, and they're using us in a lot of different contexts. And so we have a lot of just relevant, contextual, fresh, high-quality user data that we can use to fine-tune and train our models for different use cases. Just to give you a sense of scale, we process 75 billion user events every single day.
Wow.
And so that's a scale at which we operate. And so that's great. That gives us huge advantage in terms of, you talked about, what is a moat and how do you actually navigate through this kind of fast-changing landscape of AI. I think it's, for us, one of the big areas where we feel like we have a unique advantage is the quality of our user data, and we use it to make the product better. So we fine-tune these models using our user data across different use cases. And then we personalize in different ways, as you said. So for the individual, we allow you to figure out how to sound more like you. Like, what is your voice? And you can kind of fine-tune that. Today, it's a bit more manual than we'd like. And so over time, we think we can automate most of that away. But that's kind of the direction we're going to go in. And for organizations, it's really about how do you make sure that if you have a style guide, if you have a set of brand, or if you have sort of considerations about how you like to communicate, maybe you have a set of corporate values and you want to make sure you're consistent with those, we can make sure that you're enforcing that and you're compliant with it. And then you can apply that across all the communication happening inside the organization, but also with customers to make sure that when you're sending out external communication, it's consistent with your corporate brand and identity.
Right. And is that mostly like kind of rag on the values and kind of putting context into the context window, or like, or are there cases where you'll actually fine tune? You're like, this is the board model and, communication model, and this is the, casual email model, or...
Yeah, the granularity of fine tuning is still a work in progress, but typically we fine tune on use cases, and then separate from fine tuning on use cases, we kind of ingest organization specific knowledge. Like, these are your style guides, these are your brand tones. For example, if you're a loan officer and you're communicating to a customer, there are actually very strict rules around what you can and cannot say. And so if you have a set of rules, typically what they end up being in some large document sitting around somewhere saying, here's like 25,000 rules that you got to follow when you communicate with someone who's applying for a loan. We can automate that. And so we're in the flow of the communications. We can actually apply those. So that's what we do at the organization level as well. So to make sure that, like all these things that are sort of manual, out of the flow, can actually be automated in the flow.
And you mentioned now a few times things you do, post output of the LLM. And so obviously there's tons you do around safety. Like what have you built for kind of the post output processing? And then, how have you actually gone about building that?
Yeah, there's a whole set of things we do. So like if you think about like we look evaluating the LLM and you want to figure out, okay, is this good enough to ship for this use case? There's actually quite a complex, there's no one size fits all. There's no one magic number that once you hit that number, ship it. There's actually a kind of a multi-dimensional process. So first, we look at external benchmarks. There are lots of different general purpose benchmarks. We look at the ones that are closest to our use cases. And so we get some objective external measurements. So we have that. Then we have safety evals. So we run through we have seen so many safety challenges because we operate at scale We get a lot of user feedback and input on false positives in the field. We take action on those things. And so we have built up a very good understanding of like what are the guardrails and parameters around safety. So we do our own safety evals on models.
Totally. And what a powerful thing to have an eval data set from the real world, from actual things that users care about.
Exactly. And then we have our own side-to-side comparisons, because there's nothing like having an expert, a linguistic expert, looking at output from a model, looking at idealized output from a human and saying, yeah, this is the one I prefer.
Yeah.
And so we have that side-by-side data. And then we do experiments. We ship a model maybe to a small percentage of our users. And that's the acid test, as I mentioned. Sometimes you think everything's good and your users look at it and say, actually, I don't like it. I'm rejecting suggestions at a very high rate. And we can look at that and say, yeah, we didn't meet the mark. We got to go back to the drawing board. So, and then you iterate through that process. So it's 4 or 5 different things that we do. And we kind of look at it's art, not science.
Yeah.
And so then you got to look holistically and say, yeah, on kind of taken together, this is good. This is good to go. Let's ship it.
I mean, one thing I know our listeners will be interested in, I think everyone's thinking about in the GenAI landscape today, is just the competitive landscape and how it evolves. And, in the same way that it feels like these models have dramatically increased the capabilities of what you guys can do at Grammarly, I'm sure there's folks now that are taking an email, putting it in a ChatGPT and say, make this sound more professional or whatever it is. And, Apple has Apple Intelligence. I'm sure, Notion, Google Docs, all these folks will kind of, be able to benefit from these models too and put it into their products. How do you think about like the way this, it seems like an inevitability that like the space you were building for is now going to happen. Like it's going to be everywhere. It's going to be ubiquitous. That seems clear. And there's just a question of like, well, who gets to capture the end user?
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
So a couple of ways. One is first of all, competition is great. The attention is great. I welcome it. Like we've been at this for a long time. The fact that someone else comes in and tries to solve use cases that we know how to solve brings attention to the problem space. And that's great. We actually see increased interest every time there's a launch like Apple Intelligence, because people are like, oh, so what does Grammarly do again? Let me go back and take another look at it. So it's a massive market. And so I want to be laser focused on solving our use cases, because if we can just do that and do it well, I think we're going to be in a great spot. Second way I look at it is we got to be clear-eyed about what are the differentiators, what are the moats. I talked about one of them being the fact that we have all of this great user data that we can actually use and apply and do this in a kind of in a cyclical loop to make the product quality better. And I think that's a unique advantage we have. And no advantage is infinite. Eventually, every mode is breachable, but we have a big advantage there, and we're going to stay focused on improving it and making sure that our service gets better and better for our users. We also have another advantage, which is that we operate everywhere people work. It's a very, very fragmented landscape of tools in which we communicate. Just to give you a data point from Grammarly, we at Grammarly use 200 different B2B SaaS apps. Maybe we're a little bit too fragmented and we should consolidate a bit. I think there's some work happening on that front, but we're not that far off the norm. It is a very fragmented landscape. And maybe that's fine because you want to use best of breed tools to run your business. And so we are the providers that can sit in your Gmail, in your Microsoft Word, in Slack, in Salesforce, in Greenhouse for candidate feedback, whatever line of business app you're using, we can be across all those different touch points. And we can elevate the use of AI to have a uniform stack across all these different apps. We're not here to sell you Grammarly because we really want you to use our email tool. We're not here to sell you Grammarly because we really have this other platform we want to use. We're here to just make all the existing investments you've made across all these different tools better, because that's what we spend most of our time at work doing. So making that better is a huge unlock for the organization. Earlier when you mentioned what are the best users of Grammarly, it's people who've recognized that unlocking communication effectiveness to drive business outcomes, that is the way that Grammarly should be used.
No, it's interesting, especially as you talk about some of the places where the product's going. Obviously, having context across a bunch of different parts of your organization end up being so crucial to being able to actually do some of the kind of brainstorm and initial, more higher level reasoning work. Because there's only so much reasoning you can do without the context.
Yeah.
AI just seems so core to what you guys do, but obviously there's workflow in the product you build and all sorts of other things. How do you, think about structuring your AI team internally? I feel like we see these two models. One is like we have this kind of like core research group and they're kind of pushing the boundaries on the model side. And the other is, well, we kind of just embed it in each, existing product team we had. They all have, they're all AI teams now. Like, how do you guys kind of structure that internally?
We do both, and it's a time scale issue. So like one of the things I mentioned earlier was we think in the future, looking at the trajectory of how efficient these models are getting, that on-device is going to be very, very capable. We're not ready quite yet, but it's something we want to keep exploring. And so when we are ready, we'll actually have infrastructure and kind of an architecture to then embed into our products. But that's not something we can do in our product teams yet. So we have a core research team that is doing things like that are looking a little bit further out and understanding sort of what do the next 18, 24 months look like, and what do we need to do? What capabilities do we need to build? Is there some gaps in our data collection framework that we need to kind of enhance? And so they're kind of working through those things. So that's a core research team. And then we have AI engineers embedded into each of our product teams and feature teams, because these are full stack teams. We're launching a feature. It's got front end, back end, and it's got AI capabilities, and we kind of work together to enable that use case.
And is on-device not ready because it's just hard to get these models small enough to at the quality level you want? Or what are like the barriers to doing that?
No, I think it depends on the use cases you want to support. I think for some of the complex, I think for simple use cases today, I think on-device is ready. So it's a question of, we're watching to see how quickly this evolves. It feels like efficiency gains are coming fast and furious.
Yeah.
And so that's great. And so we want to make sure we kind of hit that optimal point of, wow, this is now 10x more efficient. We can do a lot more. And here's why we want to do it. Like latency is way down. Cost is essentially zero at this point for inference. And so we're waiting to see kind of when that point is when we can actually say we're at a point to deploy it. It's not that far away. So I think we're kind of moving in that direction.
It does seem like it. I feel like next year, it feels like there's going to be a lot.
I think next year is a safe bet. Yeah.
What are other parts of like the enterprise AI market that you pay attention to, or things that that you think are particularly exciting?
What's really interesting is, first of all, AI is really going to transform the way we work. I think, like with all these big transformations, it is overhyped in the short term, underhyped in the long term, and really it is going to transform everything. It is a journey, though. I think today what I see is there's a bit of maybe kind of let's set it and forget it, or deploy it once and we've checked the box and we're done. I think it is a transformation journey, just like on-prem to cloud didn't just happen with one deployment. It was a multi-year transformation. So you deploy some stuff onto the cloud, you see what it does to your business, deploy more things onto the cloud, kind of evaluate what's going on, and then over time you transform your business, because that's what the cloud enables. So we're just in the early stages of this transformation journey. So one of the things that I think I see from a lot of enterprises is, how do I select my AI vendor?
Yeah.
Because this is not a one and done deal. I got to be with the selection I've made for hopefully several years, and I need to trust the people I'm partnering with on this journey. So we really aspire to be that trusted partner, because I do think it is a journey, and it's gonna kind of play out over time. But the end effect, the end of all of this, is going to be profound.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be interesting. The other interesting thing about enterprise is, I think there's a lot of experimentation and excitement, but the actual productivity gains are a bit elusive from what I can tell. So like there's a ton of investment and there's a huge amount of CapEx in supply and compute predicated on all this massive productivity gain that's going to come from AI. Hasn't yet fully materialized outside of a couple of core use cases. Like, for example, I think software engineering and code generation is one that I think is very clear, but it's not happening across the board. And so we, one of the things that guides us and our work is we want to make sure that we can measure and demonstrate the value of the product. So it's not just a kind of a pie in the sky. It's got AI. What more do you need? It's like, actually, how is it driving your business forward? So an interesting stat we have is that the average user of Grammarly in an organization saves 19 days per year on average, single person. That's like a month's worth of work. And so when you think about what that does across the organization, that is what's going to drive business transformation. Now and this is today, this is not futuristic, this is happening today. And I think as we look forward and enable all these amazing use cases with AI, I think we want to stay grounded to that kind of building on that repeatability and measurability, because we've got to demonstrate that AI actually is delivering the goods.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think for all the investment and excitement, I feel like, to your point, code generation, I feel like customer support has been an early use case that works, internal search, what you guys are doing. But there's not, you could count them on one hand, maybe two. Yeah. I think it's still very early days. And I mean, I think to your point, like having a metric like the 19 days you save or something, like there's a lot of products that are kind of interesting, but no one's really quantifying what the actual value is. And so it's a pretty cool stat.
Yeah. So I think that's good for us, but I think that's generally something that, enterprises should be, and I think are looking at. Like, A, can I trust you to be there long term? And B, what is the measurable value? And I think that's good. That's a healthy sign.
I mean, one other area I think you have an interesting purview into is like AI in education, right? Because a lot of people use Grammarly as students, and I think you guys have done some really interesting work with the University of Texas. And kind of ship these features to. That's like I believe it's like you basically can use Grammarly as you're producing a paper or something, and then at the end you can kind of cite, hey, here's all the places I used AI. So it's not like AI did the entire thing, but I was kind of using it as more of a co-pilot. Maybe talk a little bit about that work and like what's happening today with like the use of Grammarly and other AI tools in education.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting moment because the question is, this is a very powerful new tool. How do we use it? How do we incorporate it into the classroom, into pedagogical methods? It could be misused like any tool. And I think this is true for education across the board. I remember when calculators were considered like, oh, you're cheating, you're using a calculator. I remember early, like maybe 15 years ago, looking up code snippets online was considered cheating in an engineering interview. And then people quickly got past those things and said, no, that's not once you get hired, most of what you do is search online for code snippets. And so why are we using that as a gate? And so let's focus in on what you can uniquely do, how you can be creative, how you can synthesize. If you can find code effectively on the web, that's great. I think AI is the same way. How do we use it in a responsible way? And what we found we talked to a lot of educators, we talked to a lot of institutes of higher education, and what we found is generally people are very eager to engage. They want to partner with industry. They want to make sure that they don't want to walk away from it. I think initially maybe there was a bit of, I think let's like ban AI. I think that's largely dissipated from what I can see. Now it's more about we are trying to equip our graduates to have skills that will enable them to be successful once they graduate and enter the workforce. AI is going to be one of those critical skills. So how do we best equip our graduates? And so we are very committed to being responsible partners. So one of the things we launched, that I love this feature, which is you can cite your use of AI in a work product. So let's imagine your assignment was write a 500-word essay on the Civil War. And student A says, hey, Grammarly, write a 500-word essay on the Civil War. And student B says, they write the essay, and then they really engage with Grammarly to make the work product better. Like, hey, Grammarly, can you give me feedback on paragraph number 2? Do I need more data? Can you give me feedback on my conclusion? What other feedback do you have? Am I persuasive enough? And they engage. The tool is giving back suggestions and feedback. I'm looking at it, incorporating it. In student A, they didn't use the tool as intended. They didn't engage with the material. They haven't learned about the Civil War. Student B actually has gotten better, and they've deepened their understanding of the Civil War. You can tell those two cases apart by the use of citations. Yeah. So I think this is awesome. It's an example of the creativity I see from the kind of educational institutions where they're figuring out how to use these things. We're going to launch something, depending on when this airs, imminently.
I think we'll air it after you launch it, so you can talk about it. Okay. We won't spoil the release.
Got it. So we're launching this thing called authorship. And authorship is another example where we want to be responsible and give educators the tools to bring AI into classrooms responsibly. What authorship does is looks at a piece of content and gives you the provenance of every piece of that document. This part was written manually. This part was cut and pasted from somewhere else and maybe paraphrased. This part was AI generated or what have you. And you can look at every part of the document and figure out like what's acceptable. Maybe a piece of it was acceptable to be auto-generated, but most of it shouldn't have been and it wasn't. That's great. And so authorship, I think, is another step in that direction, like citations, where we're just providing people with transparency and tools so they can kind of build the guardrails for themselves on how to harness the power of the tech, because I think you have to. Yeah. You cannot put your head in the sand and say, if I just ignore it, it'll go away. It will not go away. You've got to engage with it, and let's do it right. And we are committed to partnering with folks who want to do that.
It's so interesting. So you basically give the academic institutions the opportunity to say what is acceptable and what isn't, and
and students as well, because students can then understand how they can actually harness the power of the tech in ways where they are kind of furthering their academic goals. Because if you're a student who wrote that 500-word essay on the Civil War without engaging, ultimately that's to your detriment. Maybe you got away with it or whatever, but ultimately you're trying to set yourself up for success once you graduate. And so what do you need to do to be able to equip yourself to do that well? And so we want to enable that outcome.
And it's super interesting. I mean, that example you gave obviously, is powered by and can be done with the quality of the models today.
Yeah.
As you think about like 10 years from now, that student that has I don't know if they'll still be assigned to write a 500-word essay on the Civil War, but let's say they are. Like, what do you? How do you imagine they end up using AI tools? That get more and more capable?
10 years, it's hard to say. It's gonna change so much. But I think in general, like my vision for how AI should be used, whether it's in the workplace or whether in schools, is it's a tool to give us superpowers. It's a tool to augment us. Like we got to really keep in mind as we develop this technology that we see this not as a tool of displacement, but as a tool of augmentation. And so if you apply that lens, which I really deeply believe, then ideal scenario is 10 years from now, students are using AI as just a powerful tool to engage better with the material, to engage deeper, to get feedback in real time. And keep in mind, AI is also a great leveler. We are very fortunate in the US. We have access to a ton of educational resources. Many parts of the world don't. And so the choices are not, do I talk to my teacher or do I use AI? The choice is, do I just not study or can I use AI to help me study? And so AI just really opens up the aperture for what's possible. That's super exciting.
Totally. And it's really powerful. I feel like a lot of times with these new technologies, people will like glorify the status quo and be like, well, compared to this like idyllic, 8-person class, like, is this really as good? And the reality is like already probably with the quality of these products today, it's just such a step change above,
Absolutely.
a lot of global education. I'd be remiss not to ask you a little bit, quickly about, obviously before you were at Grammarly, you spent quite the run at Google. And as I understand, you spent a lot of time on the Chrome side.
That's right. Yeah.
I feel like that's the space that's going to change a lot. Like, what do you think, if you were still at Chrome, like what does the web browser of the future look like given all the advances in AI?
I think it's exciting. I think, people are going to search for content and consume content very differently because of AI. And I think I've been out of Chrome for many years, but I'm imagining the Chrome team is really figuring out how do I embed AI. And I think they started doing some of those things into the browsing experience because so much of it now is going to be synthesizing information, maybe remembering things that I've seen in different places, keeping track of it, surfacing it at the right moments. And so I think it enables lots of awesome use cases that one of the things we always struggled with in Chrome was too many tabs. I have doing research, too many tabs. Maybe AI can finally solve that problem. That would be fantastic.
That would definitely be helpful.
Yeah.
Well, we always like to end our interviews with a standard set of quick fire questions to get your take. And so maybe to kick it off, what's one thing that's overhyped and one thing that's underhyped in the AI world today?
Overhyped, chat interfaces. I think chat interfaces to me are just a subpar command line interface, and I hope they'll just disappear into the background very quickly.
Yeah. And how about underhyped?
Underhyped, I would say, I think AI is a great tool to upskill and uplevel people around the world, and I don't see enough of that happening. It is really a great democratizer of skills. We gave the example of students who don't have access to education, and AI can really help with that. And I do think that's true in the workforce as well. Maybe people who are struggling, don't have the skills, can actually upskill very significantly with the help of AI. So AI as a force multiplier to upskill people, I think is a profound force.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be awesome. And I don't see that being talked about as much.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I feel like in a lot of the initial studies of the power of these AI tools, they're most impactful on folks that maybe are a bit in the bottom half of an ability in something, and I think it's incredibly compelling to think about where that might be implemented. What's been the biggest surprise in building AI features for Grammarly? Like maybe one thing you're like, this is definitely going to work, and the users didn't end up caring, or something that you were like, not totally sure if this will work, and the users ended up loving it.
It's not like I went in thinking users won't like this feature, but the extent to which people resonate with the tone detector and tone AI feature has been just amazing to see. I routinely will, if I'm wearing Grammarly swag and walking down the street, someone inevitably will stop me and say, hey, you work at Grammarly? Let me tell you about this tone feature and how it saved my life in this one scenario, or I had this heavy thing that I was going to do, and Grammarly really saved me in this situation. And so that's really been something that's been very evocative for users. Just the extent to which it's helped people has been awesome to see and fantastic.
And is that a constant iterating feature that you're going to like continue to provide even more nuance on the tone, or what's like kind of the future of that?
Yeah, more nuance, connect your tone. As I said, one of the kind of directions of travel is more connection with our suggestions to your outcomes, your desired goals. And so you can imagine tone getting connected to that as well.
What's something you've changed your mind on since running Grammarly?
We were historically a direct-to-consumer business. A couple of years ago, we started an enterprise business. And we're seeing a huge amount of demand for Grammarly services in the enterprise. That's the fastest growing part of our business. It's like on fire, and that's great. I initially assumed that these would just be very separate things. We have a consumer business over here, enterprise business over there. And I've completely done a 180 on that. I believe that the distinction between consumer and enterprise is very artificial. And so many of our users today will buy Grammarly by themselves, what we'd call consumer, but they're buying it to use at work. And so the question is that an enterprise deployment of one, or is that a consumer sale? I think it's a very kind of a artificial distinction. And so we are really building the company, and as we scale the enterprise business, I see it as very much of a user journey. So maybe as a user, you start out using Grammarly, the free version, you upgrade to premium. Maybe you do a self-serve purchase of 5 or 10 team licenses. And at some point, as you're scaling across the enterprise, maybe our sales team will get involved, and we can call that enterprise. But really, it's a seamless customer journey. So I think I didn't fully appreciate how connected these are, and that's how actually we're building the company.
Which AI startup outside of your space are you most excited about right now?
I got to say, one of the most exciting uses of AI is AI for healthcare, improving healthcare outcomes. I love what AlphaFold is doing, and I think just kind of the precision of figuring out where the most interesting, fruitful areas of research are for drug discovery, game changing. That's just awesome. ModMed, one of our Grammarly customers that I mentioned, they're using AI to drive business transformation, and they're using it to improve patient outcomes. And I think that's just such a great, awesome use of AI, having real, tangible, life-changing impact today.
Totally. Hard not to get inspired about that. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm sure folks will want to pull on all sorts of threads. I'll leave the last word to you. Like, where can folks go to learn more about Grammarly, about the work you're doing? Anywhere you want to point folks.
Yeah,
the mic is yours.
Yeah, great conversation. You can go to Grammarly.com to learn more. We're also available at Grammarly on X, on LinkedIn. We also have a presence on Instagram. We have a presence on Threads. You have a presence on Facebook, on YouTube. So wherever you consume a social content, we're there. Come look us up.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much. This has been fantastic.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.